The sun was bright in London on a special spring day. People lined the streets early in the morning. They were waiting to see Prince William, Kate, and their 3 children. Today, the royal family would go to Westminster Abbey for an important ceremony. Westminster Abbey stood tall and grand against the blue sky. It was a very old church where kings and queens had been crowned for hundreds of years. Today, it would host a big event to honor British tradition. Flags flew from the top of the building. Guards in red coats and tall black hats stood by the doors. In Kensington Palace, the royal family was getting ready. Kate woke up early. She sat at her dressing table while a stylist did her hair. Kate chose a beautiful blue dress that matched her eyes. The dress was made by a famous British designer. Kate liked to wear clothes from British designers to support them. Prince William put on his special uniform. It was dark blue with gold buttons and medals that showed his service to the country. He looked in the mirror and straightened his collar. William thought about his role as the future king. He wanted to make his late grandmother, Queen Elizabeth, proud. Their children were in their rooms with nannies who helped them dress. Prince George, the oldest, was 9 years old. He put on a small suit that made him look like his father. Princess Charlotte wore a pretty dress with flowers on it. She was 7 and loved pretty clothes. Prince Louis, who was 4, did not want to wear his fancy clothes. He ran around his room while the nanny tried to catch him. Kate went to check on the children. She smiled when she saw George standing so tall and serious. "You look very handsome," she told him. George smiled back at his mother. Charlotte was already ready and sitting nicely. "Can I wear my sparkly shoes?" she asked. "Yes, but be careful not to scuff them," Kate said. Then she helped the nanny catch Louis, who was giggling under his bed. William joined his family. "Is everyone ready?" he asked. Kate nodded. "Almost," she said, as she fixed Louis's little tie. The family would soon leave for Westminster Abbey. Outside, they could hear the sounds of horses as the royal carriages arrived. The children ran to the window to look. A staff member came to tell them it was time to go. The family walked together down the grand stairs of Kensington Palace. Photographers waited at the bottom to take pictures. William and Kate smiled. The children had been taught how to behave in front of cameras. They smiled too, even Louis, who had been so wild just minutes before. They stepped outside into the bright day. The royal carriages waited for them. The horses wore special decorations and stood very still. A footman opened the carriage door. William helped Kate step in, then lifted each child inside. The crowds cheered as they saw the family. William waved to them before he got in the carriage. The journey to Westminster Abbey was about to begin. The royal carriage moved slowly through the streets of London. People waved flags and cheered as they saw Prince William, Kate, and their children. The children waved back. Prince Louis pointed at everything he saw. "Look, Mummy, look at the big red bus," he said. Kate smiled and reminded him to sit still. Prince George sat very straight in the carriage. He knew that one day he would be king. His father had started to teach him about his future role. George looked at the crowds with serious eyes. Princess Charlotte sat between her brothers. She waved at the people with a perfect royal wave that she had practiced. William looked at his family with pride. He remembered when he was a little boy, riding in carriages with his mother, Princess Diana. Sometimes it made him sad to think that his mother never got to meet Kate or see their children. But he felt that she would be happy to see the family they had made. The carriage turned a corner, and they could see Westminster Abbey ahead. The big church looked even more grand up close. Its tall towers reached for the sky. The stone walls had stood for hundreds of years. Kings, queens, and important people from all over the world had walked through its doors. As they got closer, they could see more people waiting. There were news reporters with cameras. Important guests in fancy clothes were going into the church. Police officers made sure everything was safe. The royal guard stood straight and still, not moving even when flies landed on their faces. The carriage stopped at the front of Westminster Abbey. Footmen rushed to open the door. William got out first. He turned to help Kate, who stepped down gracefully. Then they helped the children out. The crowd cheered louder when they saw all 5 of them standing together. A church official in a long black robe came to greet them. He bowed to William and Kate. "Your Royal Highnesses, welcome to Westminster Abbey," he said. The children were taught to shake hands properly. George and Charlotte did this well. Louis hid behind Kate's dress for a moment before he shook the man's hand. They walked toward the big doors of the church. The path was covered with a red carpet. Flowers in beautiful arrangements stood on both sides. Kate held Louis's hand tight so he wouldn't run off to touch the flowers. William walked with his back straight and his head high, showing George how a future king should carry himself. Inside the church, it was cool and quiet. The noise from outside seemed far away. The ceiling was very high, and the windows were made of colored glass that let in rainbow light. The family paused for a moment, looking at the beautiful old building. Even the children were quiet now, feeling the special feeling of the place. People already sat in rows inside. When they saw the royal family, they all stood up. William and Kate nodded to people they knew. They walked down the long center aisle toward their special seats at the front. The children walked between their parents. Their footsteps echoed on the stone floor. The royal family took their seats in the front row of Westminster Abbey. The chairs were made of dark wood with red cushions. William sat at one end, then Kate, then George, Charlotte, and Louis. Louis wiggled in his seat, trying to see everything at once. Kate gently put her hand on his knee to remind him to sit still. The abbey was filled with beautiful music. A choir of men and boys in white robes sang songs that seemed to float up to the high ceiling. The sound of the big organ made the floor vibrate slightly. Charlotte whispered to George, "The music is pretty." George nodded. He liked the deep sounds of the organ. Important people filled the other seats in the church. There were members of the government in dark suits. Royal families from other countries sat nearby in their own special clothes. Some wore crowns or special hats that showed they were royal. Old friends of William and Kate smiled and nodded to them. The ceremony began with a procession. Men carrying tall gold crosses walked slowly down the aisle. Church leaders in colorful robes followed them. Everyone stood up when they saw the archbishop in his special hat and robes. He carried a big book and walked with small steps. Louis pointed and asked in a loud whisper, "Why is that man wearing a funny hat?" Kate put her finger to her lips. "Shay," she said softly. But many people heard and smiled. They liked that the royal children were still just children, even at big events like this. The archbishop reached the front of the church. He stood at a tall wooden stand and opened his book. "We gather today to celebrate the history and future of our nation," he said in a deep voice that filled the whole building. William and Kate listened carefully. George tried to sit like his father, with a straight back and serious face. Different people went to the front to read special words or prayers. Some read from very old books. Others spoke about important things that happened in British history. Kate helped the children follow along in the program booklets they were given. Charlotte found a picture of the abbey and showed it to Louis to keep him quiet. Then it was time for William to take part. He stood up and walked to the front. The archbishop handed him a special book. William read words that kings and princes had said for hundreds of years. His voice was strong and clear. Kate watched him with pride. She thought about the day they got married in this same church. After William finished reading, he walked back to his seat. George looked at his father with wide eyes. One day, he would have to do the same thing. William gave him a small smile, as if to say, "Don't worry, you'll be ready when the time comes." The ceremony continued with more music and more readings. The children were getting tired of sitting still for so long. Kate had brought small books for them to look at quietly. Louis leaned against her arm. Charlotte sat up straight like a proper princess. George watched everything with interest, knowing he needed to learn all about these traditions. After 2 hours, the long ceremony was almost over. Louis was getting restless. He whispered to Kate, "Is it done yet, Mummy?" Kate shook her head and whispered back, "Soon, "Darling, just a little longer." She took a small mint from her purse and gave it to him. This kept him quiet for a few more minutes. The Archbishop raised his hands and said the final blessing. His voice echoed through the big church. Then the choir began to sing the national anthem, "God Save the King." Everyone stood up. William and Kate sang the words they knew by heart. George and Charlotte tried to sing along too. When the music ended, it was time to leave. But royal families couldn't just walk out like regular people. They had to wait for the Archbishop and church officials to go first. Then the King and Queen would leave. William, Kate, and their children would be next, followed by other royal family members. They stood in the aisle, waiting their turn to walk out. Louis spotted his cousin, Princess Beatrice, and waved to her. Charlotte stood very straight, copying the way Kate held herself. George stayed close to William, watching how his father greeted people with a nod and a smile. Finally, it was their turn to walk down the long aisle. William and Kate moved with slow, careful steps. The children had practiced walking this way at home. Louis tried his best, but took small, quick steps to keep up. People smiled as they watched the family go by. Outside, the bright sun made them blink. The steps of Westminster Abbey were filled with photographers. Cameras clicked and flashed. "Look this way, Your Royal Highnesses," called the photographers. William and Kate knew exactly where to stand and how to pose. They had done this many times before. The children stood in front of their parents, George in the middle, with Charlotte on one side and Louis on the other. They had been taught to smile but not to wave while photos were being taken. Louis found this hard. He wanted to wave at a little girl he saw in the crowd. After the official photos were done, the family walked down the steps. More people waited behind barriers on the street. They held phones up to take pictures. Some had been waiting for hours just to see the royal family for a few seconds. William and Kate waved to them. Now the children could wave too. A line of black cars waited for them instead of the carriages they had arrived in. The cars would take them to Buckingham Palace for a lunch with other guests from the ceremony. A security guard opened the car door. Kate helped the children get in while William spoke briefly to a palace official. Inside the car, the children relaxed. Louis took off his little tie. "That was so long," he said. Charlotte smoothed her dress. "I like the singing," she told her mother. George looked out the window at Westminster Abbey. "Someday will I have to lead ceremonies there?" he asked his father when William got in the car. William nodded. "Yes, but not for a very long time," he said. "And we will help you learn everything you need to know." The royal car drove through London to Buckingham Palace. This was not their home. They lived at Kensington Palace, but the king lived at Buckingham Palace. Big events were often held there. As they drove, they could see tourists taking pictures of the famous building with its tall fence and many windows. Guards in red coats and tall black hats stood at the gates. They did not smile or move, even when people tried to make them laugh. The car drove through the gates and into a large courtyard. Other cars with important guests were arriving too. The royal flag flew from the top of the palace, showing that the king was home. When they got out of the car, palace staff were waiting. A woman in a dark suit bowed to William and Kate. "Your Royal Highnesses, the king is waiting in the blue drawing room," she said. William thanked her. The family followed her through a side door into the palace. Inside, Buckingham Palace was grand and beautiful. The floors were shiny, and the walls were covered with paintings of kings and queens from long ago. Large vases filled with fresh flowers stood on tables. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceilings. The children's shoes made soft sounds on the thick carpets. They walked through long hallways where palace workers bowed or curtsied as they passed. Louis waved at everyone. Charlotte walked like a perfect little princess. George looked at the paintings, recognizing some of his ancestors from the history books his father had shown him. They entered the blue drawing room, which had blue walls and gold decorations. King Charles, William's father, stood talking to a group of people. When he saw his son and family, He excused himself and came over to them. The king gave Kate a kiss on the cheek and patted the children's heads. "Well done, all of you," said the king to his grandchildren. "It's not easy to sit still for so long, but you were very good." The children smiled at their grandfather. Even though he was the king, to them he was just Grandpa. He often gave them small presents when he saw them. Sure enough, the king put his hand in his pocket and pulled out 3 small boxes. "I have something for each of you," he said. Inside each box was a tiny pin with the Westminster Abbey symbol. "To remember today," he explained. The children thanked him politely, just as they had been taught. More guests entered the room. William and Kate moved around, talking to different people. This was part of their royal work, making everyone feel welcome and having short conversations with many people. The children stayed with their nanny, who had joined them at the palace. Servants in black and white uniforms carried trays of small sandwiches and tiny cakes. They offered drinks in crystal glasses. The children were allowed to have juice and some of the food. Louis took 3 little cakes when the nanny wasn't looking. Charlotte told him, "You'll get a tummy ache," but she was smiling. The lunch reception at Buckingham Palace went on for 2 hours. Many photos were taken. Some would go in newspapers and magazines. Others would be kept in royal albums to remember the day. William and Kate posed with important visitors from other countries. The children were in some photos, but not all. George, Charlotte, and Louis were getting tired. They had been on their best behavior all day. Louis yawned big and didn't cover his mouth. The nanny quickly reminded him of his manners. Charlotte's perfect princess posture was starting to droop. Even George, who tried hard to act grown-up, was looking at the clock. Kate noticed her children were tired. She whispered something to William, who nodded. Then she went to speak to the king. A few minutes later, she came back to the children. "We can go home now," she told them. Louis jumped up and down, happy to hear this news. The nanny reminded him that they still needed to say proper goodbyes. The family said goodbye to the king and the important guests. They thanked the palace staff who had helped with the day. Then they went back outside where their car was waiting. This time, they would go straight home to Kensington Palace where they could relax. In the car, Louis fell asleep right away. His head rested against Charlotte's shoulder. She looked out the window, watching London go by. George talked quietly with William about the ceremony and the people they had met. Kate sent a few messages on her phone to thank people for their help with the day. When they reached Kensington Palace, it felt peaceful after the busy day. This was their real home, where they could be more like a normal family. Yes, it was still a palace with staff and security, but they had private areas where no one else was allowed to go. The nanny took Louis, who was still sleeping, to his room. Charlotte went to change out of her fancy clothes. George asked if he could play a video game, and William said yes. Kate went to her dressing room to take off her formal dress and jewelry. She changed into comfortable clothes that she liked to wear at home. Later, the family gathered in their private sitting room. It was much cozier than the grand rooms at Buckingham Palace. They had comfortable sofas and family photos on the tables. Louis was awake now and playing with his toys on the floor. Charlotte was drawing a picture of Westminster Abbey as she remembered it. Kate ordered their favorite foods for dinner, not the fancy food they had at the reception. They ate around a table in their kitchen, not in a formal dining room. William took off his tie and rolled up his sleeves. They talked about funny moments from the day. They laughed about how Louis had almost fallen asleep during the ceremony. After dinner, William helped the children get ready for bed. This was something he liked to do when he could. Being a prince and future king took up much of his time, but he tried to be a hands-on father too. He had learned from his own father and mother how important family time was. The next morning, the newspapers and TV shows were full of stories about the royal family at Westminster Abbey. Photos showed William and Kate looking regal and the children being cute and well-behaved. Everyone talked about how Louis had almost fallen asleep and how Charlotte had the perfect royal wave. At breakfast, Kate showed the children some of the nice comments people had made. "Everyone says you were very good yesterday," she told them. The children smiled proudly. Even though they were royal, they still liked to be praised for doing well, just like any other children. William had to go to work. Being a royal was his job. Today he had meetings and would visit a hospital to open a new children's ward. He kissed each child goodbye and hugged Kate. "I'll be home for dinner," he promised. The children waved from the window as his car drove away. Kate had work too. She had a meeting about a children's charity she supported. But first, she made sure the children were settled with their lessons. George and Charlotte had tutors who came to teach them at the palace. Louis had a nursery teacher who helped him learn through play. In his classroom, George was learning about British history. Today, his tutor was teaching him about Westminster Abbey and why it was important. George could now tell his tutor about what he had seen there himself. The tutor was impressed by how much George had noticed during the ceremony. Charlotte's tutor was teaching her math that morning. Charlotte was good with numbers and enjoyed solving problems. On her desk, she had put the small pin that her grandfather had given her. She liked to keep special things where she could see them while she worked. Louis was in the nursery with his teacher and 2 other children who came to learn with him. Royal children didn't always go to regular schools when they were very young. Louis was building a tower with blocks. He told his teacher it was Westminster Abbey, but it didn't look much like it. At lunchtime, Kate came to eat with the children. She asked them about their morning lessons. George told her about the kings and queens who had been crowned at Westminster Abbey. Charlotte showed her the math problems she had solved. Louis showed her a drawing he had made of the royal carriage. After lunch, the children had sports and activities. George was learning to play tennis. He had a coach who came to teach him on the palace tennis court. Charlotte had ballet lessons in a special room with mirrors and a bear. Louis had swimming lessons in the palace pool with a teacher who had taught many royal children to swim. Kate watched some of their lessons when she could. She liked to be involved in her children's lives. Some royal parents in the past had left all the child raising to nannies, but Kate and William wanted to be different. They wanted their children to know they were loved and that family came first, even in a royal family. That evening, William came home as promised. The family had dinner together in their kitchen. William told them about his day at the hospital. The children there were very excited to meet a prince, he said. "One little boy asked me if I live in a castle with dragons." The royal children laughed at this. After dinner, they had their family time. This was important to William and Kate. No matter how busy they were with royal duties, they tried to have time each day when they were just a family together. Tonight, they played a board game that George had chosen. Even Louis could join in, with some help from Kate. When the game was over, it was time for bed. The children had a bedtime routine, just like most children. They had baths, brushed their teeth, and put on pajamas. Kate or William, or sometimes both, would read them bedtime stories. Tonight, Kate read to Louis, while William helped George and Charlotte with their reading. In Louis's room, Kate sat on the edge of his bed with a storybook. Louis's room had blue walls with pictures of boats and trains. His teddy bear sat next to him as Kate read. Louis asked questions about the story and pointed at the pictures. He was tired from the big day yesterday, and his eyes kept closing. Charlotte's room was pink and white, with ballet pictures on the walls. She had a collection of stuffed animals on her bed. William listened as she read a page from her own book. Charlotte was a good reader and liked stories about princesses and adventures. After she finished reading, she asked William about when he was a little boy in the palace. George's room had red walls and shelves full of books and models. He was reading a book about space. George was interested in science and often asked questions that William had to look up to answer. Tonight, George wanted to know about the history of Westminster Abbey. William told him stories about coronations and royal weddings that had happened there. When all the children were in bed, William and Kate went to their private sitting room. This was their time to talk about their day and make plans. They had a busy schedule of royal duties coming up. They also needed to plan the children's activities and family holidays. Kate showed William the newspapers from that day. "Everyone loved seeing the children at the Abbey," she said. William nodded. "They're getting better at these public events," he said. "But I want to make sure they still have a childhood." Kate agreed. This was something they both felt strongly about. They talked about George's future as king. It was a big responsibility for a young boy to know about. They wanted to prepare him, but not burden him too early. "He was watching everything yesterday," William said. "He notices more than we think." Kate nodded. "He's like you that way," she told William. Before going to bed themselves, William and Kate checked on the sleeping children. Louis had kicked off his covers as usual. Kate gently put them back over him. Charlotte was hugging her favorite stuffed animal. George had fallen asleep with a book next to him. William moved it to his bedside table. Looking at their peaceful children, the royal couple felt grateful for their family, which remained their greatest joy despite all the duties and demands of royal life. A week after the Westminster Abbey ceremony, life at Kensington Palace had returned to normal. The formal clothes were put away. The thank you notes had been sent to everyone who helped with the event. The royal family was back to their regular routine of work, school, and family time. William was in his office at the palace, on a video call with his charity partners. He wore a simple shirt, not a uniform with medals. On his desk were photos of Kate and the children, along with papers he needed to read and sign. Being a royal meant a lot of paperwork and planning. Kate was in a meeting room with her team, planning events for the children's mental health charity she supported. She wore a casual dress and had her hair in a simple style. Kate took notes as they talked about the next project. She wanted to visit schools and talk to children about their feelings. George and Charlotte were at their school. After they turned 5, they started going to a real school outside the palace. They wore school uniforms like the other children. They had security guards who stayed nearby, but the school treated them like any other pupils. They learned math, reading, science, and played sports with their classmates. Louis was still at home, in his nursery class with his teacher and friends. Today they were learning about animals. Louis loved animals and made roaring noises like a lion. His teacher reminded him to use his inside voice. Louis tried to roar more quietly, which made his friends laugh. In the afternoon, the older children came home from school. They changed out of their uniforms and had a snack in the kitchen. Then they did their homework with help from their nanny. George had to write about his weekend. He decided to write about the Westminster Abbey ceremony, but wasn't sure if he should mention being royal. Sometimes he just wanted to be like other kids. Charlotte had art homework. She needed to draw her family. She carefully drew William, Kate, George, Louis, and herself. She added a palace behind them and a crown over William's head. Her teacher might be surprised, but this was Charlotte's real life. To her, having a father who would be king someday was normal. When Kate finished her meeting, she came to check on the children. She sat with them as they worked. She helped Louis with a puzzle while the older ones did their homework. These quiet moments with her children were precious to Kate. Like any mother, she enjoyed seeing them learn and grow. William joined them after his video calls were done. "Who wants to go for a walk in the garden?" he asked. All 3 children jumped up. They loved being outside. Kensington Palace had beautiful gardens where they could play without photographers or strangers watching them. The family walked together through the private gardens. Spring flowers were blooming everywhere. Louis ran ahead, chasing a butterfly. Charlotte picked a few daisies to make a chain. George walked beside his father, asking questions about the trees and plants. William pointed out birds nesting in the branches. Kate watched her family with a happy heart. Yes, they had a very special life that most people would never know. They had palaces and ceremonies and crowds cheering for them. But they also had these simple moments, walking in a garden, playing games, reading stories, that were just like any other family. William caught her eye and smiled. They both knew that they were raising the future of the monarchy. George would one day be king. Charlotte and Louis would have royal duties too. But right now, they were just children playing in a garden. And William and Kate were just parents, watching over them with love. This balance between royal duty and normal family life was what William and Kate worked hard to create. They wanted their children to understand their special place in British history. But they also wanted them to have joy, laughter, and the freedom to be themselves. As the spring sun shone down on the royal family in their garden, it seemed they were finding this balance, one day at a time.